More than 50% of the organizations across the world still believe data silo is a challenge for them to manage and maintain their data. Almost every country in the world, the compliance is very simple. You need to know where your data is, how your data is, and how you access the data, which again ties back to governance. Now, what is very different from using a data warehouse to an archive system is that when we take data, we delete it from the core system. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Karkavel M Jegadeesan, and I come with about 2 decades of experience on compliant data management, and I'm currently working as the CTO of Platform3Solutions. And I'm here to talk today about enterprise data through governance. We'll start by talking about enterprise data management, the evolution of enterprise data management. Now, everything was kept in paper and records before IBM came up with hierarchical databases. Now, that was the first step on the evolution of database management systems. These hierarchical databases were essentially just file systems that managed data through relationships. Now, the problem they were solving was very simple. Storage was very expensive. They had limited data, and they wanted the best way to access that data. Now, as the data grew, hierarchical databases had a lot of challenges, and that gave way to relational databases. Now, relational databases were much more efficient in managing data. They created the concepts of tables and relationships. You can put a large volume of data in a very compact way into a table, maintain relationships, and basically use that to access data in a fast and efficient manner. They were an instantaneous hit back then until now. So as relational databases grow, the data size, the usage of data across enterprises grew, which means that the DBs, relational DBs, started getting slower and slower. So that gave way to data warehouses. Now, data warehouses are essentially again relational databases with one difference, that they were built to support batch jobs. Jobs that were consuming compute and energy from relational databases and letting access to data difficult. We were able to move them into data warehouses, and what that did was make relational databases more efficient. Now, data warehouses solve the problem of, again, scaling and growth of data. But at some point in the 2000s, we started realizing that data warehouses itself started becoming slow. Batch jobs, your APAR reconciliation, month-end reconciliation started running for days. They started becoming less and less efficient. So to manage the data growth, the next evolution of database management happened, which are data lakes. Now, this was a quick rise and fall because data lakes, while serve the purpose of managing massive amount of data, did not actually help in governing of data. So because of that reason, enterprises were not able to fully adopt data lakes, and as quickly as they came, they started their decline as well. But that also gave way to the next evolution of databases, what we call as cloud data warehouses, or CDPs, cloud data platforms. Now, they are essentially again data lakes, but with one difference. The compute was available at scale. You can scale the compute based on your querying access. You can scale your storage based on the usage, and pretty much what it did was enable you to adopt data lakes much easier and make more efficient usages of cloud. Now, this is all the history. Where are we going with this? What is the next phase of evolution? Data still continues to grow. It's still growing at a very massive space. There is still huge scope for what cloud data warehouses itself can do. But I see one difference. Now, the technology and the maturity of our enterprise has come to a point where we can look at what we call as a unified data platform. It's essentially the same lake houses, except that instead of having a separate warehouse, a separate database, a separate data lake, and a separate archival system, you can look at one system that can perform all these functions. Simply because storage and compute have gone extremely cheaper. You can scale up and scale down. You can manage all the workloads together. And this is what we predict is going to happen in the future. Now, I'm going to move on to the challenges of what data growth and what happened with legacy data, and then move on to how it impacts us today. So back in the 60s and 70s, when database management started becoming a thing, The biggest challenges were, data silos, cost of storage, high compression, and processing time. Now, if you see, most of these challenges were related to expensive hardware. Because the hardware was expensive, we could not invest in putting more compute and more storage, which means access to the data was slower. And that essentially created all these challenges. But with storage and computing becoming more and more cheaper, we came up with new challenges. Now, what we call as new age challenges for data. You can still see data silo. It still was a problem because back then data siloing happened because of the cost of infrastructure. Today, data silos happen because of the legacy nature of the technology. It still is and will be a problem. But there are also new challenges: data leakage, technology debt, compliance mandates, and cyber threats. Now, these new challenges required us to evolve better, and we'll talk more about these challenges in detail. But I want to move on and show you guys a couple of statistics. So here, you're seeing the impact of data silos in an organization. With the evolution of data, with what we have available to us as modern infrastructure, this should not be a problem, but more than 50% of the organizations across the world still believe data silo is a challenge for them to manage and maintain their data. The next slide, we are going to talk about the fines because of compliance mandate that big tech firms have. Now, these are all our technical giants. These are the companies that lead technology in the world, and they are being fined with billions of dollars on compliance mandates on how they manage their data. So, if this is the case for the top 10 tech firms in the world, there is definitely a gap in how data is getting managed. Now, what is the reason? What do you guys think is the reason for all of this, the new age challenges with data? Why do you think that with all the sophistication we have today, we are still not able to manage data better and we still have all these issues? Okay, so we feel the biggest reason is the lack of governance on data. Okay, now I want to go back to the slide on the new age challenges of data. I want us to connect how governance creates an impact on all the challenges of new age. If you see data silos, if you have a proper metadata defined, if the data is clearly defined, you can definitely make sure that you don't have data silos in your organization. Data leakage, if you have your metadata clearly defined, if you have your information, which is your protected information, clearly marked unprotected, data leakage is not going to be a problem. Compliance mandate, almost every country in the world, the compliance is very simple. You need to know where your data is, how your data is, and how you access the data, which again ties back to governance. So if you're able to govern your data well, you are definitely going to be able to manage your data better. Now, how do we govern the data? What is the single most effective way for data governance? Governance itself is a very broad spectrum. You can talk about it all day. We've already had multiple sessions on governance, how you provide data governance. But we feel that the single most important point on how we govern data is through metadata. When you use metadata to drive your governance becomes much more easier. When every data is defined through metadata, the metadata-driven governance becomes easy to manage. Now, what value does metadata-driven governance provide? Next slide. We can manage the quality of data better. The compliance of data is taken care of automatically. Data discovery becomes very easy, which means that if you're giving the data to your analytics solution for further AI insights, it becomes very, very easy. Data becomes immutable, which means that the data cannot be tampered with. The metadata will govern the data, and analytics becomes a breeze. So when you drive your data through metadata, your governance becomes simple and your data management becomes easy. Now, it's easier said than done, right? Now, I want to take a minute to talk about what is metadata itself. Metadata is nothing but data about data. It's what you define as the initial of it defines data. Metadata is nothing but your data definition, right? But metadata itself has a huge classification. What we know and see as metadata is simply your data structures, your primary keys, foreign keys, and relationships. That's just static metadata, right? Metadata comes in multiple forms. So you can see that we have technical metadata, which is what we have just talked about, your data structures, relationships, your formats, encodings, and so on. And then we have business metadata. So business metadata is the objective quality of the data, which means that the context of the data. So a simple thing like name, right? Name can be both a client name or a vendor name. Depending on how you call that field name, it can have a widely varying context. So that is business metadata. Next, we'll talk about operational metadata, right? So operational metadata is nothing but your job logs, your error logs, your audit logs, your run times, what you find about the data operationally. Quality metadata is very important and very interesting, something that we all overlook. So the quality of data you derive. Let's say you have an IoT device that is streaming data, and the device provides accuracy to the 20th decimal, but you don't want to store that much. You are only going to truncate and store the last two decimals, right? But then the quality of the data is compromised. The original quality of how the data generated at the point of storage itself is truncated. It's not going to be the accuracy that the manufacturer intended it for. Now, when you receive data, you will be expecting 50 fields, 100 fields in your row. You will get 20 fields. So quality is a metrics on what comes in the data. It defines the quality of the data itself. Next is the lineage. Lineage is nothing but your source, how the data has been transformed from the source, how it is available today, what are the changes that the data went through for where it stands today. Last but not the least is the usage and runtime data. So now this is very important because let's say you run a search on your data, right, on a big bunch of data. It takes 30 seconds in comparison to what you expect, which is 3 seconds. Now that's metrics, that's metadata. For you to capture and manage that, you will get to know what you need to optimize that. So capturing usage and runtime metadata is also very important. Now all of this add value, all of this is important. When you are able to capture everything together with the data becomes comprehensive. Your governance of data is great, and it's fantastic, right? But how do you go about this? This is just talking about this got me sweating. So just doing all of this for every bit of data in your enterprise is almost impossible. How do you do it? So that's where we have our product, our Archon Data Suite. Archon Data Suite is nothing but in very simple term, it provides complete automation from the source to target. The target is our Archon data store, which is our lakehouse, and the source is your target enterprise systems. We provide the complete set of solution that can help you archive and migrate data and protect the data with compliance. Now, it has three components, right? Archon Analyzer. Archon Analyzer pretty much can analyze any legacy system, any modern system. It can create static metadata. It can create the stored procedures. It can understand the stored procedures, and identify the fields, create relationships or identify relationships. And it creates the static metadata that is much needed for the next phase, which is Archon ETL. Archon ETL consumes what we get from Archon Analyzer. It maintains the lineage. It captures not just the data, but it also takes the metadata. The runtime is captured, the lineage is maintained, the immutability of the data is managed, and then the data is transferred to Archon Data Store. Now, throughout all these three tools together, right, they are highly integrated, which means that there are going to be no data leakages, and the whole process is automated. This provides you with something that nobody else does. It provides you with a way of not worrying about how I generate my metadata, because here we take care of generating not just or extracting and archiving not just the data, but also the metadata. We build the metadata, we store the metadata, and we use metadata to manage the data. Now, something about Archon Data Store, right? Archon Data Store is our archival lakehouse. What is an archival lakehouse? Archival lakehouse is nothing but it's like any other lakehouse, to be honest, except that there are two big differences. One is we don't let any data come into our lakehouse. In typically any data lake or lakehouses, you can bring any kind of data and then worry about how you add quality to the data, right? With Archon Data Store, it is completely driven by metadata. Without a properly defined metadata, you cannot just bring data. And when you bring data, it gets validated against the metadata. By keeping compliance and metadata management at its core, we are able to provide a solution that enterprises can quickly consume. And together with our Archon suite of products, we are not letting you also worry about how am I going to generate all this, all this metadata, and how am I going to maintain compliance. Now, everybody is talking about compliance and governance being the core of how you manage data. But if you don't have the tools and the automation to do it, it becomes very difficult to establish this practice across the enterprise. And that's what we have done with Archon Data Store. Next slide. So, what makes ADS different? It is this very fact that we provide metadata to manage the whole architecture, and we have end-to-end automation for all of your systems across the enterprise. So we have been doing this for more than 10 years, right? We pretty much can connect with any systems in your enterprise, legacy or modern systems, your ERP systems, your core banking systems, your mainframe systems, DB2 systems, it doesn't matter. So we provide complete automation that brings legacy systems into modern infrastructure. So you can use Archon Data Store for your decommission or archival needs. You can also use it to migrate data from your production systems, live archive data. So what we call as business complete data, right? So now, what is business complete data means? Any non-operational data, data that is not being updated, that is not being searched for, is what we call as business complete data. So Archon Data Suite helps you to automate and bring all of this data into our data store, into our lakehouse. We support analytics, we support compliant data management. Next slide. I'll talk a little bit more about the connectors first. So these are some of the connectors that we support, and this comes with full automation, but this is not a complete list. This is just what we see is what most customers want. Some of the key features, again, we have compliance at its core. We have an inbuilt data vault. So when you are working and managing your private and protected information, right, you don't want that to be available with the rest of your data. You need a separate data vault that is virtually air-gapped from the rest of the data to provide that additional layer of security. So Archon Data Store comes with its data vault. It provides pseudonymization so that your data is complete, but without the protected information. We are completely metadata driven, which means that at every point we generate the metadata, we store the metadata, and we use the metadata to operate the data. We provide storage tiering. Now, again, this is something that we can say, hey, every lakehouse offers. Storage tiering is a very common feature. The one small difference here is we actually use AWS S3 for our storage tiering, but what we provide in addition is that we provide logical tiering, in the sense you can tier data from a table into different storage layers and still access the data through our Archon Data Store frontend, write queries on the data. So you can say something like, hey, if the data is not used for more than 30 days, move it to a lower storage tier. Or you can say that from 30 days of creation of this bank statement, move the data to a lower storage tier. So by creating policies, we manage our storage tiers through policies, and we manage it across cloud and on-prem. So you can say, hey, move the data to cloud, to a lower cost cloud storage, if the data qualifies these criteria. Our solution runs on both on-prem. We provide a SaaS offering as well as, and we can also do hybrid offering. Next slide. So together, what we deliver for you is a compliant data lake, data archive lakehouse that can provide archive and decommission for your organization, provides cost saving, and provides end-to-end lifecycle management. Now, I want to show a picture of what it takes. If you bring Archon Data Store into your enterprise, what's going to happen is that you're going to see that every data, if you're able to connect every system from your enterprise into Archon Data Store and transfer all the business complete data into ADS, what you will see is that you will not have to invest more and more in the infrastructure to scale your enterprise. You will not have to keep working on the scalability, on the performance or the hardware of your enterprise. You will not have to spend more on your hardware and infrastructure. You will be able to get all that data into Archon Data Store, and you will be able to build your enterprise to be truly scalable and manageable. With Archon Data Store itself, you will enter the first step of data virtualization and help creating in your data fabric. Next slide. So I'll close the presentation with a couple of use cases, and then we can open up for questions. So this is one of our customers from the Middle East. They were acquiring another bank, and T24 is a very sophisticated, scalable core banking system, but the really old versions of T24, right, they had one challenge, that they kept all the data as XMLs within columns of databases, which made them almost impossible to access unless you are using the T24 frontend. Now, this particular bank, they were acquiring another bank that had this legacy T24 system running in their core, and they were able to successfully migrate all the business to their core banking system. However, they still need to pay license, still need to manage the old system, simply because legal mandates told them that they had to. we were able to successfully archive all of the data from the T24 system, and then we were also able to connect to their core banking system, which they had custom built. Now the core banking system was processing twice the load from the old system as well as the new system, right? So their data growth was phenomenal, and they wanted to build a live archival scenario. So we were able to get data also from their core banking system, and we were able to successfully create an enterprise archive for the bank. Now, what is very different from using a data warehouse to an archive system is that when we take data, we delete it from the core system. When you push data to a warehouse or a data lake, you still keep the data in the source. You are basically just duplicating data. With archive, you make sure that you generate all the right metadata, you archive the data, and you delete the data from its core. Okay. So I'll also talk about another use case. Now this is for a bank, yeah, I think this one is also a bank with a call center though. So this was a bank with about 1.6 million calls a day, and they were their call center data was growing at a massive scale. But one thing that they knew was that after the first 60 days, right, the call center data was pretty much never touched. The first 60 days though, right, they'll have customers calling them again, and they needed the data for reference. So what we were able to do was, as the data gets generated, we were able to archive the data using Archon data store, and then we were also able to bring the data back through our data mart for quick access for the first 60 days only. Now, these are a couple of scenarios. We have multiple other scenarios where our archival platform becomes very helpful for your organization. With that, again, I'll close my presentation with a quick quote. Next slide, please. Achieving great data governance is not only a possibility; it's a responsibility. Thank you, guys.